Okay. Sorry about that. I'm very glad to have you all join us today, especially at our first business event during the Christmas and holiday week. So about today. So very often, CuriousCore gets the question on what is the value of user experience, UX, for a business. And studies show that organizations that adopt UX are able to maximize customer retention, brand recognition, and revenue growth. But beyond that, investing in UX optimization can actually improve your communication with internal and external stakeholders. And at today's panel discussion, we have industry leaders, as you can see from the screen, who are going to share with you about how businesses can benefit from using UX tools to create a culture of innovation and optimizing customer insights to drive engagement. But before I introduce the speakers, let me share that you will have the opportunity to submit your questions by typing them into the Zoom chat box. And you can also send in your questions at any time during the panel discussion, but we will address them only during the Q&A part. So let's introduce our guest speakers from the panel. Firstly, we have Nagesh Devata, who is the APAC Regional Vice President and Head of Enterprise for Payoneer. He has connected millions of SME enterprise merchants to accelerate the adoption of financial services. A creative and strategic leader, he has proven experience in creating winning partnerships in cross-border commerce. Next, we have Joanne Foster, who is from the branding and design team of Smartkarma. With more than 15 years of experience in the design industry, she has helped Smartkarma develop its branding, and she is a relentless design advocate who's always looking for ways to develop and improve design systems. We also have Kayaking, who is the co-founder and head of training at HighSpark. She believes in the power of visual narratives to help business professionals deliver compelling presentations. With over 7 years of experience in the advertising industry, she has trained C-suite executives in leading organizations within Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Now, lastly, I would like to introduce our moderator for the panel discussion, Daylon Soh, who is the founder and educator at CuriousCore. A change maker who aspires to transform the education landscape, he has more than 10 years of experience working at the intersection of technology, design, and marketing. Daylon has worked with organizations across different industry and skills, including a 2.5-year stint launching his own e-commerce venture as a design and marketing lead. Now, I would like to pass the floor to Daylon, who will moderate the panel discussion.
Well, thank you, Logas, and thank you everyone for attending during the Christmas season. I hope Christmas preparations are well underway. And thank you to our esteemed guest speakers for taking time to share with you their knowledge this afternoon, and for Joanne this evening as she's dialing in from Australia. So I'm going to just start off by maybe giving each and every speaker a chance and an opportunity to talk about their perspective on a specific topic, which is user experience design and storytelling. So just maybe a few high-level thoughts on what it is, and then we'll expand the content and the context from that, like how do they use it as part of their work or part of their job. So perhaps I can let Joanne go first, if that's okay.
Everyone, and hi, Daylon. Thank you for inviting me on the panel.
Yeah.
Would you mind repeating the question, because I'm a bit nervous?
No problem at all. So it's basically like storytelling and user experience design. Like, what are some high-level thoughts you have about this particular topic, and how do you use it in your daily work? Yeah.
So yeah, at Smartkarma, the user experience team are in place to put the needs of the user first. So we very much are there championing the needs of the user. So we conduct a lot of different ways of research, and we use the design process extensively to make sure that we're always making products for our users that they want.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Let's go with Nagesh. Nagesh, yeah, what are some high-level thoughts you have?
Hi, Daylon. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for having me on the panel today. So when I think of the topic that you've just talked about, I think it's a number of different things. And at Payoneer, Our business covers, it's a global business. My role covers Asia Pacific. And we have customers of all different types across the region. Everybody from a very large enterprise, a very large corporate, all the way down to a small business. So I think for us, it's always thinking about how do we tailor our message and speak to what matters to our audience. And often it gets, it's very easy to end up trying to take the same message and cast it across the board to as many people as possible. So I think in terms of when we think about user experience or UX, it's to simplify that message to the stakeholder. It's also in terms of thinking about how it can impact their business and what their drivers are, whether it's an emotional driver or whether it's a business driver, and making sure we connect to that. And usually that can be in visual documents, financial documents, or just in the way we verbally tell our story.
Thank you for that. And I would love to deep dive a little bit more on some of the things you've spoken about later. But maybe let's have Kayaking, co-founder of HighSpark, to maybe share some of her high-level thoughts as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Daylon. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I kind of echo what Nagesh and Joanne has said. And to elaborate, I think the key word is being intentional. So UX as well as storytelling. I mean, you can have really nice interface, a really nice experience, and it's very subjective, or a really good story, but what is the end goal? So I think when we are looking at storytelling and UX in a business perspective, we have to see the tools like the articles, the presentations as a means to an end, but what exactly is the end? And then having the big picture, empathy comes into play, and then we can move in the right direction.
Yeah, so that's really wonderful as a process. And I know Kayaking and Nagesh, you have slightly different roles, but Nagesh, you're in enterprise development. So how do you, what are some of the artifacts that you use as part of your role in terms of like, as you're giving a presentation or as you're telling a story? Yeah.
Well, as much as I would love not to use a slide or a PowerPoint presentation, I do think it's somewhat of it becomes somewhat of our reality, and it's not one I'm very fond of because it is hard to customize and tailor it to the different audiences. But I think it's super important. What I found is resonating is not a lot of words, but also experiences or case studies, being able to connect it in terms of experiences so that someone can actually see what could be achieved and what, I think as Kayaking was talking about, that outcome, and making it a bit more tangible, not just making it, hey, this is a great thing to do, but really, this is a great thing to do, but here's an outcome. It either materially changes your business, it can create new revenue, or it can help you save money, or just creates a better experience with your customers. So I think that becomes the real critical thing in terms of how do you connect those experiences or those case studies back to whatever channel or mode that you're presenting, and whether it's verbal or whether it's in a presentation.
So earlier you mentioned, Nagesh, that you have both emotional and business drivers, and I'm curious to understand, how do you balance these drivers, and what would an example look like, for example?
Well, when I'm thinking about both the emotional and the business drivers, I think you also have to think about the person who's delivering the message, and you've got a lot of different stakeholders. So myself delivering a message could be one way, and somebody on our team who's a salesperson might deliver it a very different way. And I think it comes back again what they're thinking about the outcomes. And I'm thinking about something that might be a little bit more macro, whereas my salesperson might be thinking about it. How do I close the deal? How do I hit my revenue target for the month? So I think again, it's thinking about what needs to happen is really, again, understanding who your audience is and being able to put it in terms that are, people can digest. And I think a lot of times what we found has presenting too much information is also a challenge, and reducing the amount of information and being able to have, a conversation that's structured more as a conversation, that it's more of a dialogue, and being able to get information from your potential client or your potential audience, and not just making it one-way dialogue. So that's what I have always found that's more impactful in terms of trying to get to the outcome we want to get to.
Excellent. And maybe I'll go to Joanne in this case. And Joanne, I'm aware that you have to present regularly to your management team as the head of brand and design. How have you effectively done so over time? Through practice. Yeah.
Well, you're right. Yes, we do. We share regularly. We're a relatively small team, so we share regularly with our CXO, and we understand that they're quite time poor. So actually, we've devised different ways, and they all have different personalities and different ways of working. So we've sort of worked out what way works best for each person, and so we offer, for example, once we've made a design prototype that's ready for stakeholder review, we then say, would you like to send us, we share it with them, and then we say, would you like to share feedback via email? Would you like to have a Q&A session with us with a Zoom screen share? Or would you like to add comments onto our prototype? And that way we can get the best out of each person as they're the most comfortable in the way that they share their feedback. Yeah.
And that's really great that you tailor your message to the person, and especially understanding that how time-starved your management team is. I was wondering, Kai-Sin, as well, like you regularly have to pitch and you have to share what your company does. Do you have any tips to, how do you sort of make for a very succinct and very concise message to the C-level, to the management team and the decision makers? Yeah.
Right. I think the word is to prioritize, and it's quite similar to what both of them have mentioned about understanding the audience, because we tend to think that every single thing is important to include in our slides or in our communication, in the email, but it's not so. So once you distill what is the key non-negotiables, then it becomes a lot easier for you to craft a targeted message and then find the right medium to convey that story. And I think a lot of times it's not about us telling stories, it's also how we want to suss out story from our users or our audience to then tailor the artifact according to the situation to get the buy-in that we want or the action. There are frameworks that I can share, but I'm not so sure whether this is the setting, but it's always audience. And a very quick hack would be think about 3 non-negotiable takeaways in your conversation. And once you have that, then everything falls under it. I don't think you would go very wrong.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really great tip. 3 non-negotiables. And Joanne, I think I was wondering, like, as part of your process doing user experience design, you're talking to customers, you're getting research, you're getting reviews and feedback from different people. Like, what kind of artifacts do you present back to the management team, especially more on the qualitative side? Like, has it been effective, bringing data into those conversations or to your presentations? Yeah.
Yes. So, did you want quantitative? You said
qualitative. Yeah, qualitative.
Qualitative. Oh, qualitative. Yes, right. So we do a lot of user interviews with our different customers, and we've done that in sort of group sessions as a focus session from a particular team of users, and we've done individual testing of prototypes, usability studies, and then we collect all of this data, and we've turned it into customer journey maps. We've made personas, and we've made empathy maps to help us understand more about our users, and then we generally present those as a report, and then we often have a sharing meeting too, where we share with the greater team, the tech team, and other interested parties that are affected by these findings.
And that's great. And if I could ask you a follow-up question, you have junior team members in your team, so like, how do you help them get comfortable with the fact of like, presenting with data and actually, even presenting in front of the management, because that can be pretty intimidating sometimes. Yeah.
Both my junior team members are, I think they're quietly confident, and they're actually naturally good presenters. So I'm lucky that yeah, they're good at doing that. But if there was someone who perhaps was a bit more nervous, I would encourage them to present the data, because once we have collected the data from the real users, and if we've interviewed the real users and we understand what they want, then it's very easy to present their feelings and their wants and needs, because these aren't the designer's wants and needs, they're the actual user's wants and needs. So
yeah. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for being humble on this fact. If I could direct a question to Nagesh, well, following on business versus emotional drivers, I'm sure you present both qualitative and quantitative data. So what works best for you? How do you sort of like approach this? Yeah, as you're bringing data into your presentations.
So I would say I subscribe to both sides. You do need qualitative and you need quantitative. And I think, again, when you're going into any client, I think there's always, often there's an assumption, I think, from what I've seen from some salespeople, is that the client already knows everything. And the reality is they don't. So I think it's really important that you have to go in with the right mindset. First of all, that don't take anything for granted. And that's the starting point. There are things I think we all get lost in our own jargon and our own technical terms. And it's really important, I find, one, to be able to, to articulate the opportunity in terms of what you're there and what you're hoping to do for them. And it's really important to present it in terms of what's the outcome for your potential client, not what's in it for you. It becomes, I've seen it very often where people, do get lost in terms of when they're pitching a product or solution. They believe in their product or solution so much, but they forget about what they're trying to solve. So what's the opportunity, or what's the thing that you're trying to address, I think, is the starting point. And then being able to support that both from two perspectives. One, again, with data, and being able to relate it to data that shows somebody what is a potential opportunity that they're missing or what they could acquire. So again, I think you need to be able to think about where you are in the sales process and the level and quantity of data you need at different points. But if we're talking about something earlier, you're in the earlier stage or the earlier life cycle, I think you just need to be able to present, hey, here's a potential missed opportunity for you. And by doing that, I think you're able to then overcome, is there a product fit, or do I have a need? And a lot of clients that I would say I go into, a lot of times we're selling a solution or a product that they may not have a need for yet. And so we're trying to create a need. So I think very much when you're thinking about both the quantitative side of things and the qualitative side of things, it's the data to be able to support that there's a need, and then why that need should then be prioritized, and then ultimately trying to create a sense of urgency by a potential client that they want to have a subsequent discussion or they want to go deeper with you. So that's the way I would approach it when we're thinking about the right mix.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think just one point to really bring the two topics and conversation together, and it really tells me about selling a solution, right? So in your case, you're trying to share the products and services Payoneer offers, and what's the benefit that they get from it. And in Joe's case, it's a lot about like this better user experience or better customer journey that she's trying to sell to the management, and HighSpark is selling sort of like the angle whereby they can come in and help this company out. So I think over here the key word is the solution. And I was just wondering, as you're talking about creating a need and selling a solution, and we sell very technical solutions, right? And there's a lot of technical terms involved. So how do you kind of like make it interesting for for someone to listen to you, especially if, you know, if they're busy and they actually don't really need to listen to you. Yeah.
Yeah, that happens quite a bit. And so I would say, you know, visuals are really important, not getting lost in a lot of words. You mentioned diagrams or experiences. I think those are really key. And potentially testimonials. Testimonials could be either written testimonials, verbal, or videos. I think those are all impactful ways to try to you know, get someone to connect with you. And I think if you're able to do that, I think that becomes super important. But the other thing I often find is when we think about who we're selling to, we think about them as our customer, but also thinking about who is their customer. I think that becomes the critical thing. So if I go talk to an e-commerce marketplace, who's their customer? And, you know, there's a consumer and there's a seller on that marketplace. So how do I think about it in terms of their terms to be able to make it interesting and coming back to that same outcome and sense of urgency?
That's great. So yeah, I'll before I go into Kai-Sin and ask her what she thinks, I just also think that there was something that was shared with me by a friend who works for Google, which I thought was really cool, that before she walks into a meeting, she actually talks to every single person who's going to be in the meeting first and try and understand their angle before she walks into the meeting and does her presentation, which I think is a great idea. And I'll be talking a little bit more about tag teaming with people later. But Kai-Sin, over to you. You know, did you have any additional thoughts to add about from what Nagesh said earlier? Yeah.
Yeah, I notice a lot of my clients actually enter a meeting with the presentation or like with what they have already prepared, but it's so important to hook the audience's attention with a question, and not just any questions, but with an end in mind. You want to provoke their thinking. And I heard of this saying, when you ask a question, you notice what the brain is doing automatically. It's trying to think of an answer. And by that, your audience is already engaged. And if you can get them to think in a way that kind of tickles their curiosity, they say, oh, tell me more. I want to find out more because I don't have an answer for it. Can you give me the answer? And even though maybe the meeting is 5 minutes, they might actually, you know, push their next meeting just to accommodate yours because you are so interesting, right? So I think we want to get that effect. And the whole presentation or communication, we can use the same philosophy. Every message that we communicate, we want to spark that curiosity. It's not just about dumping information. In fact, to add on to whatever Nagesh has said about using the emotional driver as well as the business driver, I don't think that they should be siloed. In fact, people make decisions emotionally, right? And based on emotions and then justify them afterwards. So if we can really think, let's say empathy mapping, what do they already know? Then you ask the questions that would, you know, kind of chart that direction. What do they not know? How are they already feeling? So that you can fill the gap and really touch on the pain point and bring them to the gains that they desire.
Excellent point, Kai-Sin. And not to put you on the spot, but I was just wondering what's your favorite question that always works or you know, gets to intrigue people?
There is no favorite question per se, but I like, or rather the nature of question comes like a plot twist. Not so sure whether you've heard of that before. I'll give you an example. So if I were to ask all of you, what is the ocean made of? Can you all type in the chat? What is the first thing that comes to mind? What is the ocean made of? Or maybe Daylon, you can answer this question.
I would say salt. Yeah, but okay. I'm curious. Salt. Yeah, I'm curious to hear what other people type. Yeah.
Salt water. Yeah. Okay. So what if I were to tell you that is true, but that's the history? Because today the ocean is made of plastic. 8 million tons of plastic goes into the ocean every single year. So this is what I call like a plot twist question, whereby you're throwing a question out to get people to think. They might think of a very logical and commonsensical answer, and then you just throw them off guard and say, actually, it's not true. And it sticks because there's the element of surprise. So that's my favorite type of questions.
Okay, that's wonderful. And I think that's definitely something I'm going to start using more in my presentations in future. That's really great. So on to the topic of tag teaming, I'm just wondering, because Joanne mentioned earlier that she has some great team members who speak very well. So I'm just wondering how do you sort of like establish that relationship where you tag team with people who are on your side, or like how do you kind of ensure before the meeting or prepare before the meeting, like by talking to the members who are going to be on the other side? Yeah, so either or of these situations that you practice, Joe.
Well, I guess for our team, we always like to be aligned in where we're at. So we would have a pre-meeting to make sure we are aligned. We're also very interested in knowing what problem we are trying to solve, because that's how we create the right design solution. So that would be one question that we would be wanting to get from our stakeholders.
Okay.
Yeah, the main thing is that we are aligned in our ideas, and we have thrashed out a lot of ideas earlier so that we present the best argument or case that we can.
I was wondering, do you rehearse or do you practice like before you do a presentation with your team members? Yeah, just any tips for that important meeting? Just working the room, yeah, like any tips?
I probably can't. We do a lot of sticky note writing. So one of our favorite ways of brainstorming and thrashing things out is through sticky noting. So we use a Zoom whiteboard, and we write our sticky notes there, and we put them into different topics that we want to talk about. And then we synthesize, and then we go away and we think about it, and maybe we become bigger, and then we come back together to refine exactly what we want to talk about.
I love that idea, because I mean, that's exactly what we do in the user experience design process, and you've applied that into like you're treating a presentation as a product, and
yeah,
like synthesizing it and condensing it down. So I really like that. Yeah, Nagesh, do you have any tips, in terms of working the room, or tag teaming with your teammates before you walk into a presentation?
Yeah, I think it's quite similar to what Joanne had mentioned, but maybe just I'll add a few points. For me, and I think what I've practiced is making sure we have clear roles and responsibilities when we go into a meeting. And again, just aligning so that, we're not talking over each other. I think to me, that just shows that we're all aligned, and the messages are consistent, and then everyone potentially may have different roles in the way we're tackling the meeting. We also think about the stakeholders in the room. So, sometimes it could be one, it could be many. And that's part of also what we want to make sure we get us, ideally we're building a stakeholder map. And it's something that we're doing more of as we go through this process now, as we start to look at opportunities, and when we look at our sales funnel, starting sort of at the top of the funnel where prospects coming through, and then all the way once it becomes more mature, but is really starting to build a stakeholder map, and thinking about what each of the stakeholders are doing, what's their organization look like. Also understanding, what's in the general news with this particular client or business. Are they going through, an organizational update or acquisition, or are they expanding? I think those all become really relevant things when you're starting to put together that conversation that you're going in. And I think sometimes it's also thinking about what's sort of the beginning, middle, and end of the meeting. We know that a meeting is always going to be, it's going to be fluid, and we don't want to overscript it, but we want to know that we end off at a place that will have at least an outcome that we feel comfortable we can walk away with, and it leads to something else in the future.
Yeah, that's really great. And I was also wondering, as you're speaking about that, how do you ensure that the other side is also like aligned with you? Like, do you actually perhaps, like what my friend suggested, have some conversations before the actual meeting itself, or like, yeah, how do you maybe approach, or do you like try and convince one person on their side to to maybe help you out along? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I would love to do it maybe the way your friend at Google had mentioned it. I don't think it has worked out practically that way, and especially with COVID, you know, we're doing this a lot virtually, and trying to manage a room dynamically in a virtual setting hasn't been quite the same we would do in a physical setting. So I would think it would make great sense if we could do it, but it hasn't worked out that way. So it's really, I think, going into that meeting and making sure as we start the meeting, you know, after we've asked a provocative question like Kayaking said, being able then to establish what the roles and responsibilities, at least on our team, are. Who's going to drive the meeting, setting the agenda up front, so that there's real, you know, there's signposts for everybody to know the way we're going to take this meeting and where we're going to get it towards the end. Okay,
that's wonderful. And I was just wondering, you mentioned something about doing this virtually. I was wondering, like, how has your approach changed, or like, as you're doing your presentations more virtually now, like, what have you tweaked? Yeah,
it's definitely harder. I will say that it's definitely harder because you're trying to rely on probably some of those tools more so now than you would have in a physical meeting. In a physical meeting, you could potentially, you know, the presentation or the, you know, the side conversations might take a more prominent role, whereas I find now, and with COVID, the presentation actually ends up taking a more prominent role to be able to guide everybody, because everyone's trying to look for cues. And so that's the way I've seen is where our presentation is. It's more about giving cues and trying to steer a conversation a certain way, or trying to prompt certain discussions or discovery.
Yeah. Has there been any situation where it might be a little bit tricky? Like, for example, people don't turn on cameras, or like suddenly there's crying babies at the background. Yeah, how do you manage that?
Well, maybe that's the empathy. I think that's the empathy, being able to be sensitive to people. Yes, the turning off of the cameras is a real tough one. And I don't think I've had a simple formula to do that, apart from just asking people to turn on their cameras, especially if it's an important meeting. And that's, you know, that to me is sort of at least our commitment to be there, and hopefully, you know, the client or the prospect has the same commitment and they're willing to turn on the cameras. But we know that not everyone has the same situation in the same offices or the same home settings. That might not always be possible.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I noticed Norman just turned on his camera. Thank you for volunteering. And Kaisen, you are a trainer, so you conduct classes, and I was just wondering how do you tweak the way you do virtual presentations or virtual classes? Yeah,
of course. So presentation virtually, it's a lot difficult because you cannot see the expressions, the body cues, as you would in an offline setting. Hence, I think we have to be very deliberate in setting like signpost or check-ins. So personally, for let's say a half-day workshop, or even like a conversation that takes 30 minutes, every 5 minutes or so, I would seek validation from the participants or the stakeholders if their cameras are not turned on. So it's very important to use the chat function, or kind of call out people's name to say, oh, what do you think of this? If you're aligned with me so far, could you type 1 or 2 in the chat, so that everyone kind of gets to say something without being, like overlapping one another. Because I think with the online setting, one of the challenges, some people are a little bit too shy to voice out, and you don't want to miss out key stakeholders who weren't vocal, because it can change the overall direction of your entire project, right? Or in a classroom, maybe that quiet one was not very satisfied, but you didn't really get the response and feedback in order to change the course of direction. So it's very important to set those signposts. And I would say sometimes all it takes is just to ask, like, would you guys be okay to turn on your camera? Or you kind of engineer the situation such that they have to turn on their camera. Maybe get them to, like in an exercise, get them to share something that's physical that they need to show themselves. Or it could be a way where you get your team first to start the ball rolling. There are so many different techniques, but I think asking it's one good thing, or using the chat function.
I think those are really effective tips, and yeah, like I think they do work to a certain extent. What about Joe? Like, as you're making presentations, I know your team is sort of like separated in different countries, and sometimes people dial in different countries. Like, how do you manage some of your presentations virtually, especially if they are pretty important? Yeah.
I think there's been a really big advantage we found in running, say, a workshop. When you're able to run the workshop virtually, you can have, and it's a participatory one, using a particular program, it gives an opportunity for everybody to have a turn at drawing their bit or writing their sticky notes. So as a result, it's a great leveler, and it means that if everybody names their sticky notes, it's, in a way, it seems easier for those that speak less actually to speak up. And then we have sort of solid artifacts, the sticky notes at the end, which we can then combine to understand where everybody's at. Whereas perhaps if it was a live meeting, often, you know, the louder voices dominate, and the shy people might be too shy to have a turn or to stick something. Somehow sticking it on a virtual wall is somewhat easier perhaps than a real wall.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the advantages of doing something virtually, especially as you mentioned, if it's participatory. The fact that you can document these main things are much easier as well. So we have a question from Gary in the audience. I think I'll ask you first, Joe, since you are a UX. So he mentioned that he's the only UX designer within a company that has relatively low UX maturity. So how would you suggest the best way to evangelize user experience within the business as a whole? Yeah.
That's a very good question. I think the most important thing I've found is to explain what the value that you add to the company and why are you there. And as a UX designer, you're there to help find out the problems, to solve problems for the company's users. So you're there as a problem solver. You're not there just to make the interface look pretty. So that's how you add value to the team. And so ways that we've done this in our company is we've had design thinking, we've had a movie session, we've had presentations at our offsite, we've given training to junior designers about, first of all, what design is, and then what the design thinking process is. And recently we also had a sort of an interactive, at an offsite, we had an interactive game where we all had to get into teams and solve problems using the design thinking process. So we've worked, having worked with Daylon, we've worked really hard to evangelize the value that designers bring to the company, and to show that we do understand the business strategy, or if we don't understand the business strategy or the business goals, we've also sought out the right stakeholders to make sure that the team understands exactly the direction that the founders and stakeholders want the business to go.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. And actually, I want to also say, as your coach, that it's great because you actually take in the suggestions and you implement them almost immediately. So that's really wonderful. And I'm glad that it's actually working. It sounds like it's a very participatory type of engagement where you bring people in, you make it a little bit fun, and then people get interested about that engagement and what you're talking about. So that's really great. I hope we answered your question, Gary. So since we're talking about maturity, I thought I'll also want to direct the question to Nagesh. You know, like Nagesh, earlier you mentioned something about different customers at different points of maturity. I'm sure you met customers who are a little maybe on the lower side of maturity. How do you manage these types of conversations, or how do you cater your presentation in that sense?
Yes, we at Payoneer, at least from my experience, we have customers that kind of range all the way from, you know, the biggest of the big and all the way down to someone who's a micro or a casual seller, or someone who's starting to sell online, or a freelancer, or someone who's very independent. And what I would say is that at least some of the principles are the same. It's really understanding what their needs are. It doesn't matter whether you're big or small in terms of talking to somebody about your solution, your product. Again, if you're talking and they're not ready for it, or if they don't have a need for it, it's never going to connect. So it's really being able to put it back in the same terms, in terms of what do they get out of it? What's the value that they're going to see, both in terms of what it means to them from a commercial perspective, in terms of growth of their business. I find growth is always one of the most relevant or valuable things to talk about. And growth could mean you're going to increase the number of customers, you're going to grow your business, or you're going to reduce your costs. I think if you're able to connect on those terms, it immediately resonates. What I would say is that when you're talking to someone who's a smaller customer, the sales cycle maybe is a little different, and what they're thinking about might be more specific. Help me grow my business and help me reach a new market. Whereas somebody who's larger, their sales cycle might be either more entrenched in terms of what they're trying to do. We're just never going to do it a certain way, or there's competition that we need to think about. So it's really about having very solid reference points and data points, and also then demonstrating that they can trust you, and that I think is also a challenge. And in our industry, we're in the fintech space. There's a lot of fintechs out there, so we really need to be able to demonstrate a level of trust, credibility, and confidence that you're safe and secure. So that becomes really important, especially among larger players, where they're entrusting you with their business, and they want to see the best solution possible, so they're able to grow.
I think that's a great point about credibility over there, and I think half the work is also like helping the other side understand that you are credible on this topic and this subject, and that you should be part of that consideration mix. So I'm just going to direct this to Kai-Sin, and how do you manage a presentation or a conversation whereby people don't see the value of what you're doing, or don't recognize you as maybe an authority in the space of, say, storytelling? Yeah, Kai-Sin.
Right. First, acknowledge that their feelings are valid, and then try to understand why. I think there are three main gaps that we usually talk about in storytelling or any kind of communication. First, is it a knowledge gap that they don't see the value? Is it because they don't understand how storytelling works, or how the narrative is going to get them closer to their business goals? And if that's really the gap, then you want to educate them. But sometimes it's very emotional, right? They can't justify why they should spend X dollar to hire like a professional when they can do it themselves, or maybe it's something new that they haven't really engaged a vendor in such a specialized field before, and they have to then justify internally why they should spend that amount. And yeah, if it's emotional, then can you kind of create tools so that they can use it to pitch it internally and get the buy-in from their stakeholders? Or is it the sense of assurance, case studies, testimonials, success stories? And the last gap would be capabilities. Sometimes they know that it's helpful, and they also have a fuzzy idea that, okay, you're an authority in the space, but I don't know how to go about it in a way that would make this project a success. So I think at the end of the day, it's about identifying what exactly are the obstacles that is stopping them from moving forward, and then using the right tools to fill those gaps. And I think one very important point, or rather an anecdote or a story, would be 7 years ago when we first started out, we actually are often associated with freelancers, like presentation designers. Like, I can get my secretary to do the design, right? Why should I hire you and pay so much? And then slowly, with our own narrative, and the entire industry also shifted, right? So about 3 years down the road, with a little bit of patient endurance, we start to see that storytelling today is a buzzword still, and it means so many different things. And when it comes to filling the gaps, there are explicit and implicit way to do it. Implicit is really based on exposure, right? The more you're exposed to good stories, you can see the impact and you feel that, or when you see a bad story, you know it's a bad story, and then you value the good story more. So that's more implicit through exposure. Then there's the more explicit one where, like what Joanne has mentioned, you do educational kind of methods, training, etc., so that people would slowly shift their behavior and mindset and the meaning and value they place to certain thing. So I think this probably would apply to many of you who are selling something that is intangible. Stories are very intangible. The outcome is also very subjective, and it takes a lot of things to work. And we can't really say that, oh, you know, this company's success is because of our presentation deck. It doesn't work that way. But if we can, in the process, help them clarify the process and their messaging, why not? Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Kaisen. And I think this is quite related to the question that's being asked right here. It's how, and we have a question from Anthony, and he's asking like, you know, how to get clients to articulate their problem statement specifically, or even see the value in doing so. Did you have any additional thoughts, Kaisen, on this particular question?
I think probing question would help a lot in getting clients to articulate their problem. There are a few different questioning techniques, right? So sometimes when you ask too broad questions, people will be like, I'm not so sure, how do I answer? And based on your experiences, if you have certain options, you can say, okay, is your problem closer to A, B, or C? Then get them to choose, and maybe even spark certain idea to say, actually, it's not neither of this, it's B, right? And then if you can make their problem vivid, then ask them, does this sound like what you're going through? Get them to validate. That's also very helpful. So I think it depends also on the three gaps that I talk about, what exactly is stopping them from articulating their problem. And then in terms of when you say see the value in doing so, you mean they don't see the value in articulating their problem? Is that correct, Anthony?
Yeah, well, while we're waiting, Anthony, yeah, Anthony say it's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. Are you talking about internal discussion or external discussion? Because I guess sometimes, especially when we're speaking to people about problem, they can get quite defensive, because if it's framed in a way that you're challenging what their current approach is, they feel like, I'm not doing anything wrong. Like, why do you want to fix me? Or when you're trying to evangelize something, right? Like UX, like current way is fine, not broken, why fix it? So you should, or you can consider opening up possibilities rather than getting them to articulate their problem to still meet the same outcome of what you want them to achieve.
Do you happen to have an example of that, like opening up possibilities, like a good example? Yeah.
Right. So okay, let's use the UX evangelizing UX in the company. So what are some of the outcomes you can achieve by doing that? Right. So you can ask, are there certain companies that you're inspired by? What do you notice about the way they approach their user experience design? Or what are certain business goals? As opposed to saying that, do you know there is certain problem about our current way of process or our UX experience? Yes. So it's kind of the same, but it's framed in a very different wording.
Yeah, the former is definitely a lot more positive, and it's kind of inspiring as well, and then quite aspirational. You're kind of getting them to think about, hey, we could be like this, rather than, yeah, these are all the problems, and we're all in the problems right now. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I add just one caveat to that? So it's really about understanding the audience, because some audiences don't really, they don't relate to opportunities. So I get a sense that your audience can relate to opportunities, but it's not always the case. So you have to gauge whether you should use the pain or the gain in order to resonate with them.
Yeah, I love those keywords, pain and gain. So Joanne, do you have a story or an example to share where you have to handle an objection, or you have to handle tough questions from your stakeholders? Yeah, like how did you overcome that?
Let me think about it. Yes, I think, going on the problem statement, over the years, really, as a designer and then a UX designer, getting problem statements out of clients is often very difficult. Often clients present with a solution, and it makes the designer's job very difficult if they present a solution, because they're generally wedded to that solution, and that solution doesn't necessarily take the user's needs or pain points, as you said, or issues into consideration. So as the UX team, I think we have to work very hard to work out, to try and to politely delve to get into what exactly do you perceive the user's problem to be, and then really to go about validating that is the problem that we should be solving. So we would then, if we've been presented with what we think is a problem, then we would go out and ask users or test to find out whether users are actually facing that problem, in order to solve the right problem for our users. As the previous person said, making sure you solve the right problem, because if you solve the wrong problem, or problem people don't have, perceived problems that stakeholders might think might be a problem, but it isn't actually a problem, the problem is actually something else, then we won't be adding value for our users.
Yeah, that's really great, Joanne. And I was just wondering, like, if you meet resistance or if you meet objections, Joanne, like how do you stay cool as a designer? I mean, as designers, sometimes I notice that, because I coach designers, right? Sometimes we get a little emotional, or we get a little down because of the shift. So how do you kind of stay cool and calm? Yeah.
I think the most important thing for designers to remember, to understand as designers, is that we're in the business to solve the company problems and to add value to the company. So we're not there. You don't take a job as a UX designer or a graphic designer, a paid job. You're not there to make things that you think look pretty. So in fact, whilst stakeholders or others may perceive that you're defending your design or you're precious in your design, you're generally, if a good, well-trained designer is not in love with their design. We were taught at uni to do at least 3 options. You do many options, and you present 3 options to the client. So when presenting the options, you'll always expect feedback. You'll always expect something to be wrong. So you open to their feedback, and then use testing to show this isn't my opinion, and I want the right thing for the company. So I won't argue I don't argue for it because I want it for myself. I'll argue it for the user. And I think that makes it easier, depersonalizes it. This is not my thing and your thing. This is what's best for our users.
Excellent. And I think that actually sums up how nicely that you are aligning with the voice of the customer that you're serving. Over to Nagesh. And Nagesh, I'm sure in your field of work, you meet a lot of objections and rejections and resistance, or even like tough questions. Just wondering how, over the years of doing it, how do you sort of overcome these? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say personally, I have met my fair share over the years of objections and rejections, all of the above. I think, I guess, with time, you do get better at dealing with it. It's probably just a function of, learning the tools, getting the experience. But what I have found is, maybe it's just my own view, is that there is never truly an end to every opportunity, and every opportunity, to me, has the potential of taking you somewhere else. It may be in terms of them introducing you to somebody else, or there may be a new opportunity that comes through them, or maybe the vendor or the solution provider they considered instead of you is likely to be inferior or not up to the standards that you thought of. So for me, again, I think I always think about it more in terms of the relationship that I'm building along the way. And that becomes really paramount. Of course, I'm very confident in terms of, our solution and being really realistic about our solution. Do we have a good solution? But it's really critical that along the way, we're building and cultivating that relationship. And what I have found over the years is that a lot of people that have rejected or said no to me do come back and see me as someone they can reach out for advice, expertise, or thoughts on, hey, we're thinking about doing something else. What do you think? What's your perspective on this? And I think you want to be able to establish that position. Again, if you're the lowest cost provider, that's great. That's probably not where I'll ever be in terms of any of the companies I've worked with. But if I can establish myself as that trusted advisor going forward, and throughout this entire sales process, I think I've done well. And dealing with the objections, it's tough. I will admit it. And I kind of go through that period of grief after every time someone says no to me, and then overcome it, and then really try to position ourselves and do two things. One, what could we have done better? I think that's really important to go back and think about what could you have done differently and approach that. And then how do you implement that going forward? And then making sure you keep that relationship in your position for the next discussion or opportunity that comes up.
Yeah. That's really wonderful. And just as a follow-up question, I was wondering, we spoke about preparation, we spoke about what you would do during the presentation. Is there anything you would do like right after the presentation in order to become that trusted advisor?
Yeah, I think a few things, and this is a real scenario. This was an opportunity that didn't go our way recently. After the meeting, we wanted to make sure we had a really good relationship with the key stakeholder. We knew he went with a different provider. We just wanted to know what was it that maybe we had a gap. So that was very much where our focus was just trying to get that feedback, really honest feedback, tell us what we didn't do, and where were those gaps. And he did share it with us. He was honest. I don't know if we could accept everything that he did say, but I think there was relevance in a lot of stuff. And we wanted to make sure that we built a relationship outside of that particular opportunity. And we ended up going kayaking with this particular client in McRitchie, and tried to see if we could build a non-professional relationship.
Wow, that's really wonderful. How did you find out that your client actually loved kayaking?
Well, again, it was just more asking him. We said, let's go for coffee afterwards. And he said, let's take a boat, and, we can go chat out in the hot sun.
Okay. Wow. That's the first time I'm hearing it, but yeah, good advice. And Kaisen, I think in your field of work, you meet a lot of objections as well. Like, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, first, I think it's very important to see objections as a good opportunity to train our critical thinking, right? So rather than see it as a dead end, we can view it with excitement. And I often think that it's about the skill and the art of reading in between the lines so that we don't miss the opportunity. Because when someone were to say no, sometimes they don't really mean no. But it's for you to probe a little bit further to understand the why. And what I found really, really helpful is to ask mirroring questions. So if they were to say, I don't see how UX can be of value to my company, then you can ask them back, in what situation would UX be of value to the company? Then get them to think, and maybe they will give you the answer, right? You don't always need the answer yourself, and sometimes we over-justify. And again, back to the 3 gaps that I've mentioned: knowledge, emotional, and capabilities. Sometimes on the surface, the rejection might present as though it's a capabilities gap. I have no time, no resource, no budget. But perhaps if you dig deeper, you would realize it's actually emotional. Perhaps they don't see, or they cannot justify the value, they don't feel assured. Hence, they might not really entertain the idea of sourcing for other budgets somewhere else. But if you can address that emotional gap, perhaps the capabilities gap would also disappear. So I think it's an art and skill that I'm still learning, but it's very interesting to read in between the lines to really get to the heart of the issue.
And that's a great technique, like mirroring. It almost gets them on your side instantly. And we have a question from the audience from Larissa, and this is related to UX, so I'm going to direct it to you, Joanne. Thanks for the great insights. I was wondering how much information of the UX process do you disclose in a presentation to a stakeholder or client, and how often would you update them about the project? Over to you, Joanne.
Okay. So to preface it, we always make our presentations to stakeholders that we don't actually deal with any outside clients. So therefore, we're quite relatively small company and open plan office, collaborative workspace. So we found as a creative team that the more people understand about what we do and the reasons we've made the choices we make and the processes we go through to get our solutions, the more valid and trust that the stakeholders put. So I would say that because we're a small open company, we disclose a lot about the UX process. In fact, we're evangelizing it, and we're wanting the company to, the more that the whole company understands about the design process and about the value of design and what we can add, then that will improve the design maturity of our company. So my goal would be that we would become a design-led company where it's led from the top, that the value of design filters and all the way through. And how often would we update them about the project? I would say that we have different people we make presentations to, some different internal people within the company. For example, if we were making a presentation to the tech team, we'd want to get them in at the start of the project to talk about feasibility. And then we want to update them halfway through to see if what we're creating is actually viable for them to build, what problems they might see, what resources they might need. And then for stakeholders, we update them at the end of when it seems appropriate, as in we completed a certain percentage of the project, then we'll update them and get them to feedback. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Larissa. Yeah, I think it's a very sound process that Joanne has shared, and definitely, from my understanding, working with Joanne and team, they do more with their internal stakeholders. So yeah, just as a wrap up, I was wondering if anyone has any final questions. If you do, please share. And I think Gary just came in with a very long question, so I'm just gonna read it out, and maybe anyone who wants to answer it in the panel can do so. I found that working in a fintech sector as a UX designer, leading stakeholders here tend to lean more towards solving the business problem directly based on statistically backed data from Google Analytics or system help desk statistics. So it seems more quantitative. Do you think that numbers, the what, is sufficient enough to make design decisions? The stakeholder doesn't seem to feel that qualitative research data is as important as like quant data from Google Analytics. Yeah, does anyone in the panel encounter, a situation like that they only want to hear quant data, like they don't want to hear a story?
Yes. No, you go.
I mean, yeah.
I think Joanne is the expert, but because we also run data storytelling workshop, and it's very important to note that humans are the one interpreting the data, and sometimes we have assumptions. Actually, not sometimes, all the time we have assumptions and biases, which would skew the kind of meaning that we place to the data. If there is a way for you to use certain questioning techniques also for your stakeholders to understand how they are interpreting it, maybe not in the most skillful way that might result in costly consequences, I think they would be more open to exploring the qualitative side of the things. Yeah, Joanne?
Yeah, I agree. I think the same thing. When you're working with people who deal with numbers all day long, then of course they're going to favor the quantitative over the qualitative. But as the designer, if I don't understand why somebody's doing something, or for me, it's not enough just to see, okay, well, only 20% of people use this feature, but why aren't they using it? And you can really only find that out, I think, by asking people.
Yeah, that is definitely true. What about for Nagesh? Like, have you been in a similar situation where you meet someone who's super number driven? Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of again, it sort of depends where you are in that sales cycle, but we do come across a lot of people who are very data oriented because they want to be able to justify why they're making a decision to their internal management. And so the qual side is really important to get them, I think, at the earlier stages, but as they start to go and build their own case, they're looking for that data. The other thing I think about data is, what is the source of data? And general source of data, or sort of general industry or macro data, I think is generally available for a lot of people. What they're looking for, what we find is typically they're looking for very specific data from us around, you know, our source of data, or our business data. And then the other piece is, I think everyone's generally very busy, and I know myself, if I was on their shoes, is help me make the interpretation of that data. Help me come to the conclusion about what you want me to take away from that data. Don't leave it just to me. I think people want to be pointed in a certain direction so that they can either challenge it or they can accept it.
That's excellent. And thank you for sharing and answering the question. And I think people are saying awesome insights and over here. And we're about to wrap up since we're close to the end time. I was just wondering, from each and every speaker, if you have like some top tips with regards to the topic at hand today. You know, what would you maybe convey to a more junior team member, or what advice would you give? Any tips in general that would be appreciated. I'll start with Kayaking side. Yeah, Kayaking, do you have any end notes or tips?
Yeah, three things. First, it's to clarify what is the end goal. Then second thing is, what is stopping the audience from achieving that end goal, the three gaps that I've mentioned. And then third thing, it's really to use skillful questions to dig deeper and to validate your own assumptions. So this is also very design thinking and our UX kind of process validation. So three things.
That's useful. Thank you for sharing, Kayaking. And Nagesh, what would be your top tips? Yeah.
A couple of things, and I think Kayaking mentioned it very well. It's for me, again, it's not always thinking about a sale or trying to think that's the only outcome. I think there's multiple outcomes, and getting people to be comfortable with multiple outcomes is the first thing. And the second point is really about taking help and looking for help. You know, I had the benefit of working with Kayaking 7 years ago, and I still, you know, lean on her for advice even to this day. So I don't think, regardless of where you are in your own career, how good you are, I think you can always look for help. It's another pair of eyes. It's a fresh pair of way of looking at different things. And I think it's always critical. So definitely seek out help.
Okay, thank you, Nagesh, for your top tips. And last of all, Joanne, like, what are your top tips?
I think I agree with both of the other speakers. But I guess my top tips for junior designer, I've completely gone blank. I had several of them, and
you
now
say something about junior designers. Yeah, like how do you?
Well, I think I would say make sure you do understand. Start by understanding, talking to your stakeholders or your seniors or other people in the team to understand who you're designing for and how you can add value to the company. And then I think don't be afraid to as well ask for help, and don't be afraid to ask others to talk about their roles in the company, because it's actually very interesting when you find out what other people do, and then you can collaborate together.
And that's wonderful as well. And I think that's the purpose, to know that you're not actually telling the story alone. There's so many wonderful things I've learned from the panel today. Thank you, Nagesh, Joanne, and Kayaking, for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your experience with all of us. And just as a request, we'll like to maybe take a photo to commemorate this first maiden session we're having. So if you could kindly turn on your camera, that would be great. We'll love to take a screenshot. And then we have some other additional messages that we want to share with the rest of the audience. So thank you, Norman and Joseph. Yeah, if you could turn on your camera, that would be awesome. Thanks, Elizabeth and Swati. Okay, so maybe thank you, Larissa, and for your questions as well. Good to see you all. Thank you, Anthony. You look very good. Very nice hair. All right. Who else do we have? If okay. So maybe, yeah, Logas, we can take a screenshot and we're good. And then I think HighSpark has something to announce. Yeah, it's exciting. Yeah, so stay tuned. Okay.
Thanks, Daylon, and for the just give me a minute. Okay, thank you, Daylon and Nagesh and Joe and Kaisin for the valuable sharing and for the tips especially. I found it useful with the storytelling part. So yes, thanks for that. And before we wrap up, yep, Kylene would like to share something with the attendees. Elizabeth, could you help to share the screen? Thank you.
Did we get the photos?
Yep, we will.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So yeah, over to the HighSpark team.
All right, thanks everyone. So we've been receiving quite a few requests about how to gain mastery. So if you haven't already know the industry and what HighSpark does, basically we teach people how to communicate better through stories and visuals. And we also help people like Nagesh and many storytelling advocates to do the job. This is something new upcoming for 2022. Basically, it's a members network. So if you think that you would benefit from this, you can scan the QR code and join the wait list. Basically, we would be sharing a lot of tips and tricks, design hacks, as well as challenges, sample answers, in order to really help people gain the exposure and kind of differentiate what is good visual story and what is not so good visual story, and then have the community to support. And it's quite interesting because through this process, there's a lot of iteration, and we're also receiving feedback from clients to validate. And this is born because of client feedback. So if you think that you would benefit or you want to find out more, you can scan this QR code and fill in the form. And if you have trouble doing so, I would put the link in very shortly. And that's it. Thank you very much. I hope all of you would start applying all the insights today.
Wonderful. And Kaisin, are you going to be on the platform? Are you going to be giving advice on the platform as well?
Yes, me with my very competent colleagues.
Okay.
So monthly group coaching, and yeah, you'll see me. We have so many recorded videos, tips and tricks that we have compiled over the years.
And this is completely free to join.
There is a membership fee attached to it,
Okay,
which
sure.
means that it would only get better if you learn something today for free. That means that the paid one is even better. No obligations, only if you're interested. Yeah,
Okay.
This is just a wait list. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all for your interest, and thank you all for attending the session. We hope you have taken something away. Just as a shout out as well, if you love this session, please, we'll love to hear your feedback. Please send me and my team a note if you have any feedback on the session. We would love to understand what you would like to hear in future as well. So you can email us at mail@curiouscore.com. That's the best place to reach out to us and give us some feedback on and thoughts on the session itself. We also have a podcast and a YouTube channel. So if you're interested in user experience design, feel free to attend. We talk to practitioners, but this particular webinar series we're trying to bring this to an even greater audience, especially the business audience. And we're trying to make sure that it's generally applicable in different parts of your life, in your career, whether you're in marketing, you're in operations, you're in sales, like many of you here are today. So really great. Thank you for attending our first session. And yeah, Logas, do we have anything else to add?
No, I'd just like to thank the speakers for their valuable insights and for their time. I mean, given that this is the holiday season, right? We are really very grateful that you participated and joined us today. And for the rest of the attendees, I wish you all a happy holiday and a new year ahead.
Okay, wonderful. Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy New Year. Take care.
Thank you.
See you next year. Bye-bye.
Bye. Happy holidays.